Good afternoon, everyone. I'm glad you're here with us. This conference talks about the different external threats facing Israel, especially Iran, but we know that sometimes houses can collapse from the inside because of termites or other ways, and that is national resilience. And I would like to talk to you, Professor Reichman, and hear your opinion. Beforehand, I would like to congratulate us for this first conference that we're holding at Reichman University. It's a very prestigious conference. People know that they climb from here. So tell us, what do you think about our domestic resilience and strength, which is existential for us? What type of threats of internal threats are we facing? Violence, lack of control. I remember there were times when I dealt with Lebanon, and the Minister of Finance talked about the participation of the ultra-Orthodox sector in the workforce. Where are we going? What direction are we going? And I'm interested in hearing your opinion. I think that the concern is justified. I think that we're living in very difficult times. I can tell you that I visited the Emirates and I sat there at a dinner for a leader there in one of the countries, and he brought two people that work with him. In the Emirates, there are about 1 million people that are citizens, and then a few million that are guests, that are workers. And these two people were people from Lebanon. And I started talking to them, and they said that the problem with Lebanon is that the Christians are divided. They're 25%. The Muslims are divided. There are Sunnis, there are Shiites, and then there are the Christians. The Christians are divided amongst themselves, and that is what causes the problem. So I thought for a moment about how a country, a city, that were so glorious part of the Middle East, considered Paris of the Middle East, it broke down, it collapsed. It's civil war. They're on the verge of catastrophe. And why? Because they destroyed each other internally. And then take a different group that took its place, that succeeded. The tribes, the families managed to unite, and they're working together despite the differences of opinion. When I look at Israeli society, I must admit that I'm concerned by what we see, and the problems are very difficult ones. I see enormous gaps that are opening amongst us. I would begin by saying that we heard a lot about problems with security and the Palestinians and economics and other things. These are all means of existence, the existence of a state. But the question is, what are we existing for? What is the purpose of our existence? What is our vision? In which direction do we want to go? And we even have a shared vision. And if there is no vision, then we are in a situation of collapse. And looking at the state of Israel today, I would say that there are things that we have to focus on. First of all, we've lost control. There's a problem today. If you want to go to Eilat, you have to go through the south. You have to take at least 2 cars or even a convoy so that you can help one another in case the Bedouins decide to block the road or shoot at you. Or I heard stories from IDF officers that during wars that they wouldn't drive through Wadi Ara, they would drive in convoys and other routes, on other routes. It reminds me of the time of the British Mandate. In order to get to Jerusalem, you would have to drive through terrible roads that were controlled by the Arabs. In the south, the citizens are afraid. There's violence everywhere. They break into IDF bases, they steal weapons. And in the north, the situation isn't any better. According to the data that I saw from 2020, The agricultural violence has exceeded has grown to unprecedented levels. They destroy, they burn in order to take over the fields in the future when the Jews abandon the land. And when you look, there are so many more examples of what's happening in the mixed cities. And the worst part is what happened recently after the operation in Gaza, when Herzl first presented his vision for the Jewish state. It was in the Maccabim Club before the first Zionist Congress. He said at the time that we can't guarantee that the skies will always be blue, but one thing that can be promised is that no one will be persecuted because of their religion, and that is exactly what is happening. It's a pogrom. What's going on? Attacking innocent Jews, their own neighbors. It's a pogrom, and you look at that and you say, it's inconceivable. You walk down the streets of Jaffa and you could be attacked only because you're Jewish. But that's not the only problem. It's a very serious problem. We're living in a difficult situation. We're attacked on all of our borders, but the domestic violence is even worse. And we have our own violence as well. The extreme right is growing increasingly violent. There's the Lahava Association that are instigators that were part of the problem that incited the violence in Jerusalem. They attack people, beat them on the street only because they're Arabs. There's the Tag Mahir, the rebellions in the West Bank. There are instances of violence against the Arab citizens. Where is control? Israel is losing control. And there are riots, there's violence in hospitals. There were over 100 attacks. People who went inside hospitals and beat up doctors and nurses. How could that possibly be tolerated? There are even cases of violence in preschools. So we are losing control. We're losing our sovereignty. And there's another aspect that comes from a different side. If you look at the ultra-Orthodox population, Lieberman was correct. What is happening there is that there is autonomy that is outside of the national frameworks. Of course, it's not all the ultra-Orthodox, they're not all like that. Not all the Arabs are problematic, certainly not all of them. The problems have to be handled, but we cannot accept the fact that a police officer will be beat, be a police officer not to be able to have control. It's inconceivable and it's unacceptable. Things happen, and there's an increase in the official data. The official data shows an increase in murder as well, shooting, and public unrest. The data shows that there's a constant increase. People don't feel safe. And then you have a situation of autonomy of entire entities that established a state within a state, and they do whatever they want. And I must say that I was horrified when I saw the soldiers trying to enforce discipline regarding the pandemic. The ultra-Orthodox people attacked them. They called them Nazis. They beat them. There was one person, or an ultra-Orthodox man, who ran over to the police and yelled that this is a war against Amalek, a biblical enemy. We have to erase any memory of their existence. The hatred was horrific, and this all happened in the face of a very difficult reality of verbal violence, I would say almost political violence. It was a type of, it was violence of an entire tribe within Israeli society. All over the world, there is a problem of lack of safety, lack of security because of the Industrial Revolution. Not everyone can find their place. There's fragmentation of communities that can't exist anymore, that don't thrive anymore. And then there's the media. The media that's broadcasting and narrowcasting. When it used to be radio and television and newspaper, there was control. It was monitored. The language was more refined. There were other ways of intervening. There was some type of control, some type of monitoring. But now, today, everything is possible. The boundaries were broken. It's very easy to spread fake news, and it happens often. All over the world, there are communities there are social media communities, and what happens there, and the extreme cases, it happens by us as well. A community is formed, and the community has to find something, has to have something in common. You define yourself as the good guys. And you say that anyone who's not part of your community are the bad guys. And in order to maintain the community, there are loyalties, extreme loyalties that are created within the community. And then there are phenomena that exist in our society of victimization. We're victims because we're this, because we're that, for all different reasons. And surrounding this sense of victimization, there is more and more hatred, disengagement from everyone else. There's frustration, there's hatred and cohesion around figures that could ultimately lead to violence. And we've seen it in many different societies. And this is what is happening right before our eyes. What is happening before our eyes, and I must say clearly, is that Netanyahu is head of a brand, a very successful brand that he calls right, the right. And it's hard to define the difference between right and left because the differences are only at the extremities. There are some arguments, but basically it's hard to differentiate between the two of them. And surrounding this idea is anyone who's not with Netanyahu is left-wing. And in their talk, left-wing is dirt and right-wing is good. Left is bad, right is good. And surrounding this right builds forces together, and fake news is built around this discourse, saying that the leaders are trying to get rid of one another with false allegations, and this creates a camp, a large camp surrounding the social media communities. And what you see there, I must tell you, Amos, didn't follow social media, but I asked a Professor Nahon, to show me, and I was horrified. There are constant calls for murder, for violence, for humiliation, calls to talks that will lead to what is called altruistic challenges. People are so altruistic that they want to prevent the tragedies that the other side is causing. You have an entire group that are together in the demonstrations that create the group and see the bad. might create a situation in which people are violent, they put their life at risk since they're altruist. They believe in the values that they get within their group, and they're willing to pay the price. And that happened not so long ago. It happened not so long ago when Prime Minister Rabin was murdered by Yigal Amir. That's exactly what we're seeing now. We've reached a situation in which we've lost control of groups that are becoming more and more radical. You may have heard over the last few days of a public statement made by a public figure. He was talking from his heart. He's already there. He's already part of these groups, part of this discourse. He's talking about judges. He's talking about jails and about running people over and about the judges in the state of Israel, a glorious legal system that was established in Israel one step at a time. And there, all the legitimacy is of the police, of the legal system, of the High Court of Justice, the courts, and the legitimacy of an elected prime minister. This all leads to a point that I would like to emphasize. And we mustn't forget, the state of Israel has a vision. The state of Israel was established because of its self-definition, because of the right to self-definition. That self-definition is not rooted in a Knesset law. It was rooted in a historical moment that is second most important in the history of the Jewish people. The declaration of the State of Israel after years of exile, and this Declaration of Independence is a document in which Israel presents its self-definition. I think is the second and most important document in the history of the Jewish people. The first is the Ten Commandments that dictated the moral values between people. The Ten Commandments and the Declaration of Independence are what defined Israel as a Jewish state, not a state of all its citizens. It's stated that this is a Jewish state, and that the main goal of the state of Israel is to bring all Jews to Israel, to serve as a home for all Jews, no matter where they are and want to come to Israel. To find values of equality, of freedom of religion and freedom from religion. It defined values of striving for peace that are fundamental values in the state of Israel. Zionism was established in order to create an excellent society based on moral and ethical values. It can support itself. It can give dignity to all Jewish people anywhere in the world, and we have to maintain that framework. That framework is being threatened by certain groups in Israeli society. There are three main attacks against this vision, and I believe that one is, of course, the Arabs that do not believe in the Jewish state. Again, of course, not everyone. There are wonderful students here who want to feel part of the state. They're a minority, but they certainly do want to feel like an integral part of the state of Israel. But there are those that say that there is no room for a Jewish state in Israel. There is a second group that wants a state based on traditional Jewish law, Jewish halacha, Jewish law. As Smotrich said, that he follows in the footsteps of his father, who preached that the legal system should be based on halakha, on Jewish law, and that education should be based on halakha and Jewish law. Other than that, he was very moderate. Smotrich wanted to introduce that gradually, step by step, contrary to the religious Zionism that saw the combination, the integration of modern values in the State of Israel. And the third group says that Zionism is an invention, a European invention, or an Ashkenazi invention. And the Zionist perspective is activated in order to enable the continued control of Jews of European descent, and the state has to change that. That Zionism is rooted in the traditions of the wise people of the Eastern Jewish communities. Is the idea of a state of Israel as it was stated in the Declaration of Independence, does that still apply? Or do people feel that they could live within the inclusive, humane perspective that is presented by the Declaration of Independence? But all of that is irrelevant because the attacks are not attempting to harm the source. If you find any changes in the source, they are related to the ability to continue going forward. So we must reach the point, and I think we're going in that direction. This place, the Reichman University, was established, and the ethical document states that it is a university that was established based on the principles of the Declaration of Independence, and more than anything else, we have to emphasize that, and we can't compromise in any way on that, in my opinion, and we can't obscure those values, not be a little bit ultra-Orthodox, etc. We have to follow the vision, and we must place that as the highest priority, call upon everyone, regardless of their political opinion. We have to make sure that we don't cause the sovereignty of the State of Israel to collapse, that we not lose the control or the vision of the State of Israel, which is a human and powerful vision that enables the establishment and preservation of a Jewish state. Give us the tools to do so while being completely ethical and moral. If there's a message that we as a university talk about, it is the matter of responsibility that we all bear to protect this state, not only physically and economically, but also and first and foremost from the perspective of the vision of the value of this state. If we don't protect and defend the vision, then other things, nothing else will help and everything will fall apart from within.
Fortunately, we're over the timetable, but the diagnosis is very impressive. But what do we do about it? You talk about incitement towards murder. That's what happened with Prime Minister Rabin of blessed memory. The moment somebody incited against him, he murdered him for the first time. Then he was murdered physically. I see the Prime Minister coming here to the conference, and I'm very impressed by the work that the Shabbat people are doing. But they keep inciting against him. He's illegitimate. He's a traitor. We have to kill you. I don't want even to repeat what they're saying. The question is, what do we do about it? I think when people speak on behalf of democracy with incitement that leads to murder, you have to stop them and put them in jail for 30 years. Unless you have such modus operandi, everything you said is not going to work. It will continue the way it is. The situation is getting worse and worse. That's what I think. This is an incitement, and of course other actions, but I think this is one of the most shocking things. This crazy, violent discourse, throwing mud, lies, and delegitimizing people. The members of Knesset should live in security, and I salute the Shabbat people, but ask ourselves, where did we come to? After the Rabin assassination, it became worse. No question, we have to look into control over the media. And I think people who speak about assassination in the media, you have to catch, to indict. This incitement is dangerous, and I'm saying the entire way, the form of discourse and these awful attacks on all the systems, police, law enforcement, law and order, this is inconceivable. You have to indict these people. And first of all, you do not accept it. This is not democracy. That's not the state of Israel the way it was envisioned. You have to have the courage to come and say it loud and clear. And in that, you cannot accept it. And there were all sorts of people here who came and they were asked about it. They said, oh, yeah, you have opinions, people have opinions. No. This party, if it wants to maintain the principles, the Likud party, with their historic background, should come and detach itself clearly from people who call upon murder with the loud voice, to do away with the justice system, to throw away the judges, to put them in cages. Where did you ever hear such discourse? When these people continue to serve in a party, a democratic party, I say that we must be truthful to the basic Zionistic values and to go ahead with it and not to give up, not to try to create compromise among the tribes. We have to do it. I agree with you 100%. I'm not ready that a policeman who represents Israeli sovereignty will be treated like a Rosh Rag. If somebody talks like that or does things like that, put him in handcuffs and arrest him. I'm saying, first of all, it's impossible. We have to be tough in order to defend the values of law and order and the basic principles of the State of Israel. I think we should say that the national resilience together with the security feed one another. Professor Reichman, I thank you.